Hello and welcome to What Did I Miss, where today I am reviewing the Season 3 premiere episode of Star Trek Discovery titled That Hope Is You, Part 1, and looking for Easter eggs, references, and animals with thyroid conditions. Before I jump too far into the future, please hit that like button, and if this is your first time here, hit that subscribe button as well. This episode gave us just a glimpse of what the universe looks like after Michael Burnham successfully jumps 930 years from where we last saw her in Discovery, without letting us know too much about what has happened since or where the Discovery is. In fact, we the viewers know a good deal more than even Burnham does at this point, having witnessed the events of each iteration of Star Trek. But still, the episode was packed with action and heart while introducing us to some new characters that are sure to shape the path of the season and Discovery going forward. Here, I will go over the episode and point out references to past shows and movies, while also giving you my opinion about where the season is headed. This is What Did I Miss?
I heard that's more your specialty.
This is your official spoiler warning, as I will be going over the events of the episode and also referencing other parts of the Trek universe. So if you want to go in blind, please go watch the episode and then jump back here. The episode starts with an introduction of this new time period in the form of the Aditya Sail, who is manning a Federation waypoint of sorts by himself. We get to see some really cool tech that all seems to disintegrate and then reconstitute itself into other things. This would seem to be an evolution of holographic as well as transporter technology, as it seems like things like his bed, his covers, a desk, and a chair all break down and are able to reform. We then cut to a dogfight in space between two ships within what looks like space debris. During the fight, a spatial anomaly opens up, and Burnham comes flying through and hits one of the ships, causing them both to crash land on a planet. This scene was interesting to me for a few reasons. For one, we don't usually see one-on-one dogfighting in Star Trek, and it looked a lot like a scene from The Mandalorian last season to me. Also, I believe that the alien named Cosmo is a Betlaguzian, which is a hardly mentioned species but was shown in the original motion picture. But here, for some reason, we can't understand him. This is something else that we don't see too often in Star Trek due to the use of the Universal Translator, so I wonder why they use subtitles for this species. Finally, I thought Cosmo's ship looked like an evolved version of the pods we saw last season on Discovery, crossed with the jellyfish ship from Star Trek 2009, which again was another sign of evolved technology. After Burnham crash lands, she immediately tries to contact Discovery but is unable to. She then confirms her location in the time stream and realizes her mission was a success, and sends the Red Angel suit to self-destruct, which completes her mission, ensures that Control will not be able to access it, and sends the last signal back to Spock, which we saw in last season's finale. She lets out a flood of emotion, as I'm sure the events of last season have taken a toll on her. We then cut to the new intro, and there are a few curious additions to this trailer. It's interesting that the dilithium in the trailer is red, because usually dilithium is shown to be clear or even purple in the Star Trek Online game. We also see a lot of the little robots that we saw working on damaged ships last season, and we see an old phaser being broken down and rebuilt as a newer version of the weapon. Then we see what looks like a solar sail ship being converted into the same style of ship that Book was flying, and finally we get a glimpse of the new Starfleet badge. We then cut back to the planet, and the scenery is just beautiful. They filmed in Iceland, which looks to be recognizable but also a bit alien all at once. If it is at all recognizable to you, it may be because scenes in the movie Prometheus were also filmed here. But Burnham is able to track down the other ship, and we get a fight between her and the new addition to the cast, Cleveland Book Booker. We see later in the episode that Book has access to a gun of sorts that comes out of his arm, which means that he could have killed Burnham from a distance if he wanted to, so the fact that he set up this trap for Burnham must mean that he is somewhat interested in her despite his attitude that he is not. Book then tries to understand where Burnham came from and mentions that there are no stable wormholes in the area. The one stable wormhole we know about is in front of Deep Space Nine, but at the time it was mentioned that that was the only stable wormhole in the galaxy. He then states that the Gorn, a reptilian species introduced in the original series, destroyed 2 light years worth of subspace, starting to let us know that there are issues with space travel in this time. He then tells Burnham they are on the planet Hema, not Terrelysium as she planned, and escorts her aboard his ship. Once aboard, Burnham marvels at all the advances in technology and starts to acclimate herself with as much as possible. Book then asks Burnham if she has a dilithium recrystallizer, which was tech that was invented in a short trek named Runaway that involved Poe, a planetary queen who also happened to be an engineering prodigy as well as Ensign Tilly's friend. He then asks if she has any Benamite, which would power a quantum slipstream drive. This technology was used briefly by the crew of the USS Voyager in the 5th season episode Timeless, but at the time was not stable enough to use reliably. Book also mentions solar sails, which was a technology Bajorans used and Benjamin Sisko recreated with his son Jake in the season 3 episode Explorers, as well as trilithium, which is a less stable version of dilithium that was mentioned in the movie Star Trek Generations, as well as Deep Space Nine and Voyager. Book agrees to take Burnham to the city of Requiem and the Mercantile, which is a trading hub, and he tells her that she will be able to contact her ship there. Along the way, he explains that the galaxy is in its current state because the Federation has disappeared, largely due to an event called the Burn, which caused dilithium to destabilize and in some cases combust into massive explosions. We don't really get a lot of new details about the incident besides that it occurred 100 to 120 years before when they are now. Burnham states that the Federation is more than just ships and warp drives and decides to try to find them. We also learn that the cargo Book is carrying is temperature sensitive, which is no doubt foreshadowing an event later in the episode. They then arrive at the Mercantile, which is a floating structure above the city Requiem, which looks like a Blade Runner style oasis. I really like this set for a couple reasons. One, it reminded me a lot of the Exchange in Star Trek Online, which serves a similar purpose for loot within the game. Also, the port itself had a vibe similar to Paradise City from Star Trek The Final Frontier, and really lets us know that this is a different world than we're used to seeing in Star Trek. We see that the Orion and Andorian people are working together, and both are races that were introduced in the original series, but saw a lot more screen time in the show Enterprise. And there it was established that Andorian people are indeed quite surly. Upon arrival, we get to see some flying small robots that reminded me of the kids that Reno used last season on Discovery. Book explains that the purpose of the Mercantile is so that buyers and sellers can move contraband by way of negotiating through holograms and then having their wares moved by couriers, which he in fact is, that are given just enough dilithium to complete each job. Book gets Burnham into the Mercantile, but instead of leading her to the communication ray as he promised, he leads her into a trap that gets her arrested and allows him to rob her. Burnham is transported into a cell and questioned by an Orion and an Andorian. They spray her with an aerosol-based hallucinogen that makes her very talkative, and I believe we saw a similar substance used by Tilly at the Orion Marketplace in the 2nd season of Discovery, which is funny because Burnham specifically states that she has a red-haired friend that should not be given any. After learning from her about Book's cargo, the Orion and Andorian trap them with the intent of killing them, but Book and a still tripping Burnham are able to fight them off and grab some dilithium for the trip. After they are able to briefly elude their chasers, Book uses some sort of technology that allows him to summon a plant out of the water that secretes an aloe that heals Burnham's wound. He also states that he knows she is a time traveler, but doesn't understand how since time travel was banned after the Temporal Wars. The Temporal Cold War was the overarching storyline of the show Enterprise, and at that time there was still time travel technology, so there must have been subsequent wars after that one. They are then found by their pursuers and forced to empty their cargo, but not before Cosmo is killed by the Orion and the group. The cargo turns out to be a living creature known as a trance worm, and using its blowfish-like abilities, it mesmerizes the group and kills the leaders before the rest transport away. The creature then tries to eat Burnham, but Book once again uses his ability and communicates with the creature who spits Burnham out. I like this scene because it reminded me of the series premiere of Lower Decks, in which Brad Boimler is also spit out by a creature on the planet. If you watch Lower Decks, I will put my series of videos on it linked here and in the description of the video. Burnham and Book then talk some more on his ship where he reveals that he ran away from his planet and culture and is no longer welcome there. Instead of choosing a life as a killer or poacher, he tries to save beings like the one in this episode, whom he named Molly, as well as a large cat named Grudge who travels with him. Book explains that after the Federation fell, species like Molly's became close to extinct. There have been a lot of mentions in the past of ideas first seen on Star Trek becoming real, like flip phones and iPads. So it was cool to hear Burnham mention that something that was created in our time first, like the Endangered Species Act, which is actually a real thing that was enacted in 1973 to preserve the life of hunted animals, is used in the Federation. Book takes Burnham to a place called Sanctuary 4, which is a Federation way station that is within the wreckage of a destroyed Starfleet vessel. There they meet Aditya Sail, who we saw at the beginning of the episode, and discuss the current state of the Federation, which is pretty grim. He states there are only two Starfleet vessels in communications range, which is only a radius of 600 light years. He also says that his family has been manning the station for 3 generations, holding out hope for someone to come to unite the Federation, and he believes that that person is Burnham. They raise the flag of the Federation and set off to find any remnants still out there in the universe. I like this for a first episode of a season, as it effectively wrapped up the prior season without giving away too much of this season. There was a little more exposition from the characters than I would have liked to have heard, but the season is only 13 episodes long, so going over 800 years or so of unknown events would take a while to show on screen. But even the explanation of the burn was not very in-depth, so I'm sure they will keep us guessing throughout the beginning of the season as to the actual cause. But one thing I picked up is that this season is going to be about tearing things down and building that back up into something new going forward. And you can tell this from the very first scene with how all the technology shown breaks down and comes back together. Then again in the intro we see various things being taken apart and evolving into something else. I would not be surprised if we learned that the Federation was perhaps the cause of the burn, and part of rebuilding it will be removing the parts that were detrimental to the greater good of the universe. I also thought it was interesting that the new Federation flag only had 6 stars on it, which would signify that at the time it was last flown, there were only 6 planets still aligned with the Federation. The 4 planets that founded the Federation were Earth, Vulcan, Andor, and Tellar, but we do not see any Vulcans in the first episode. We do see Cardassians, Illurians, and Orion, as well as Tellarites and Andorians, but who is to say which were members of the Federation? So this episode left us with more questions than answers, so it's hard to judge how effective it is at this time. But if it sets up the next few episodes well, it will no doubt be seen as a strong start to the season. But you let me know, what did I miss? Let me know in the comments what were your favorite parts of the episode and what you think will happen this season. I will continue to review these weekly while also sharing updates on our Twitter page, which I will link down below. I hope to see you next time on What Did I Miss?